Welcome to This Humean Life. I am your host, Sam Cookithus. This Humean Life explores what it is to be human, identity, language, and the plasticity of ideas. It embraces making the unfamiliar familiar. The episodes move between the somber and the playful because life is filled with moments of both. It embraces uncertainty because the ideas are inspired by 10 years researching and living in the head of the Scottish philosopher David Hume. In the 18th century, Hume did something more successful in Western philosophy than even the Cartesian, who doubted everything but the I. Hume questioned the certainty of the I. In this podcast, the I is always in question, always in a state of flux, because it gives up the presumption of knowing with certainty who we truly are. At its core, embracing the uncertainty of knowing even the I, or the you, is what creates the opportunity to bring discovery and wonder, not just to an uncertain world, but to what we most take for granted. Do you know those moments which are so powerful? It's like someone has hit you over the head with a frying pan. They wake you up because you cannot not be present in that moment. I know I do. And I had another one of those moments last night, and I thought I'd share it with you. And here's what it was. I really saw at another level how your thoughts create your reality. And this is not just like a trite expression which you say in the personal development sphere to show how much you know about personal development. This is not an expression which we just throw out there as if it's the solution to all of life's problems. No. This is something to discover. This is something to discover about the default context in which you live. How many of you have got angry in the last few weeks? How many of you have got into a space where you go, life isn't fair. Things shouldn't be this way. I get it. I've been there myself at times. The anger comes up. But that is the default context. That is not who you are. You are not anger. You are not sadness. Nor are you joy, for that matter. Those are states of being which impact your experience of life moment to moment. So I started by saying I got at a whole new level the way in which thoughts create reality last night. And it was so powerful. It was so powerful. It meant whatever I was going to share with you became irrelevant because I want you to get this. I want you to really see where in your life you are not getting that thoughts create your reality. When you look at everything going on in the world, you see so much, which likely brings you disdain and anger and upset and sadness. The pictures that we see day in, day out are not ones which tend to bring joy. The news cycle is not something which tends to bring joy. You would expect, if the news cycle was a depiction of what is real in the world, that nothing good ever really happened. Now, is it true that this is actually what people want? Do they actually want the doom and gloom? Do they wake up and go, "Ooh, let's read the doom and gloom paper today"? Or are we just so conditioned to expecting that this is what we're going to read about, that is what we are told about? That's what we get to hear about. Well, if you think about the percentage of people who like to retreat to the internet to watch cat videos to cheer themselves up for the day, it tells us something probably about how much people don't want the doom and gloom constantly. They want an escape from the perception that everything is doom and gloom. To someone who is not a lover of cats or likes that particular form of escapism, you may be thinking, but that's such a waste of time. Why would you spend your time doing that? To which I would respond, well, that's only how you see it. To someone else, this may actually be cathartic. To someone else, this may be the escape which gives them the peace of mind. This gives them some sense of joy and happiness and lightness in a world which feels like doom and gloom to them. So now I want to explore this idea of doom and gloom a little bit more intimately. I want to explore it from the idea of the doom and gloom of the everyday, not in the newspaper, but in the news cycle of your life. And to do that, I want to illustrate this by using an example which came to me in a discussion yesterday evening. And here's the idea. Someone very close to me was working with someone called a channeler of some form of healing. And the idea behind this is that the person can tap into some sort of spiritual realm where they can give access to what someone should do, some big decisions they should make in their life. Now, what happened when this person went and had the session with this channeler was that life suddenly tipped upside down. Everything they thought they knew, everything they had been working to move past, suddenly became front and center, and it felt hopeless. And when I mean hopeless, I mean this kind of talk. And it's the kind of talk that I am familiar with because it's talk which I've had around my own life at different times. There was a few years ago when this was the predominant talk. That is, what's the point of continuing? Why don't I just crawl under a rock and wait to die? Have you ever been in that kind of space? Have you ever had that kind of thought where you just like, oh, this is too much. I wish it was just all over. I can remember that thought from a very young age. I can remember being sent to my room and having a thought like, oh, I'll show them. I wish this bookcase would fall on me and I'll die. Then they'd be sorry. That's the child, which is arguably playing forward in your future when you have that thought as an adult. And the reason I say that is we don't tend to have thoughts about doom and gloom without having some past experience which have made us feel like that's the case. Now, there are different ways you can deal with a situation when someone enters into this pattern of thinking, when they enter into this real doom and gloom about their life and everything feels like it's tipped upside down. One is just to say, I'm so sorry you feel that way. Is there anything I can do? Another, which might seem common, is to invalidate the experience. To say, no, that's ridiculous. Why are you thinking like this? You just need to think differently. But I'm going to offer you a third way, because this is the way that I utilize with the people that I really care about in my life and the people that I work with. The first thing I do is I hold space. I hold space and recognize that their experience is their experience. If it's the case that thoughts create reality, well then the thought that everything is doom and gloom is the reality that someone is experiencing in the moment where they have the thought that everything is doom and gloom. When someone has the thought that I wish I could crawl under a rock and I would just die, that is the experience in the moment when they have that thought. But, and here is the crucial thing, is it true? Is it actually the case that everything is doom and gloom? That it would be better just to crawl under a rock, to die, to not be around, to just end it all? Now, in some cases, it might be tempting to say yes. And it's tempting to say yes because the experience of life in those moments is just inside of that realm of everything's doom and gloom. Why am I still here? What's the point? And look, I get it because I was there myself. And I really acknowledge that that's your experience. I really acknowledge that that's what you have made that mean. But here's what there is to do next. And here's what I do. I break down the thought. We really explore it. We really explore it. So let me give you some examples. In this session, this channeler told this person's very dear to me that the best place they should live was in the same small country that their partner, so I should say their ex-partner, now lived. They should move to a country which is so expensive to live for a person who is dramatically concerned about their finances and is aware that in their current paradigm, they could not afford to live there. They are told a story like, your mother never loved you. She never loved you. She never showed you any love. Now, if you were looking for insight around your life, and you were told, you know what? Your mother never loved you. Imagine for a moment how that would make you feel. I can imagine it would make you feel pretty upset. I can imagine you would either reject it or you would take it on as true because you have evidence in your past experience for that reality. And this is the crucial thing. We can find evidence for anything. What we are brilliant as human beings is creativity. And I don't mean creativity in the way that we tend to think of creativity. I mean creativity in the sense of we have a rapidly developing imagination moment to moment. We have so many thoughts consciously and subconsciously operating all throughout our day, at every moment. And what we do is we connect ideas. We use the imagination. I'm calling it the imagination. You could call it something else. We use the imagination to connect ideas. When I hold a mug, which I have filled with water, I think of it as my mug. When I purchase a beer at a pub for money, I now think of that as my beer. But if someone was to take the glass whilst I was still drinking my beer, I would probably say something like, give me back my beer. By contrast, if the glass was empty and someone took it, I probably wouldn't have any problem with it. Now, what's interesting here is previously, when this glass was full, it was my beer. But when the glass was empty, it was just a glass. How has this magic happened? Well, it comes down to the imagination. It comes down to the fact that we associate the contents of this glass, where we have purchased the contents of the glass, as something which is our property. And yet, when the glass is empty, we have an understanding this is no longer our property. In law and philosophy, we would call this a use right. You have a use right to the glass, but you don't have a property right in it. If you take the glass home, you've taken the glass which doesn't belong to you. Now, the point of this isn't to give you a philosophy lesson or a legal philosophy lesson. The point of this is to understand the way in which our mind is constantly connecting ideas and creating causal inferences. It's creating connections which then create the reality that we live into. So now I want to bring this back to the idea of your mum doesn't love you. And the way our brain can connect to that with the evidence we have for incidences which make that thought seem true. You're 4 years old, you're waiting at school to be picked up, and your mum's late. What do you make that mean? My mum doesn't love me. It's your birthday, and you asked for a shiny truck. And instead, you get a viewfinder. My mum doesn't love me. If she loved me, she would have given me the shiny truck. These are the kind of thoughts that we have as children. These very simple thoughts where we see something and we go, that must be what's true. As children, we're constantly looking to structure our reality. And then as we grow up, we reinforce that reality. After about 10, we are reinforcing the existing neural pathways. And so then the experience of life looks to be more of the same. So if you'd already had the thought as a small child that mum doesn't love me, then you will likely find evidence throughout your life for that thought again. Unless you realize at some point that is just that. It's just a thought. It's one of the billions of thoughts that you have had throughout your life. But we as human beings, these wonderful meaning-making machines, take these incidences and we become programmed and conditioned to think this is the truth. This is what is the case. Since this is the case, we can no longer ever really be loved. We can never ever really be whole and complete just as we are. We become these broken people because we didn't have that love from our parents. And here I want to say bullshit. No matter how much it seems like a parent neglected you or how much you feel like they abandoned you, none of those thoughts mean they don't love you. We interpret that that's the case. We take on the meaning that that's the case. But none of it means anything beyond we had the thought that they abandoned us. None of it means anything beyond the thought that they don't love us. It is still just in the realm of thought. And so now I want to explore why this is so important to get. Because here's the thing. When this person woke up the day before, they were not living in a reality called my mum does not love me. They were living in a reality called I have a fantastic relationship with my mum. I really admire my mum. I really admire all that she's done. I really admire all the support she's provided for me, especially in the last few years. And I really see how much she loves me. But yet, that perception could, for a moment, be tipped upside down by someone providing access to new evidence that this old belief was actually the true one. And here's now where I really want to question the very approach. This spiritual approach which would create this inherent truth about who someone is for you in your life. And the reason I question it is because it is not true. It's not true in my experience at all. And if you take it on as true, then you can never have an experience with that person again, which is magical. You can never have an experience of being fully connected with them. You can never have that experience of feeling their love to this great capacity because you are holding on to a thought, this is just fake. They don't actually love me. They're just pretending to do so. And here's the thing. We like to be right about our thoughts. We like to be right about our thoughts. We like to justify our thoughts. And so we look for evidence which tells us we are right. We look for evidence which is going to justify that very thought. So someone might respond, but your mum actually does love you. Don't you understand? And to which you say, but look at what happened here. Look what happened here. I told you. This tells you that she doesn't love me. If she'd loved me, she would have done this. Is any of this sounding familiar? Is any of the upset that you have around your parents fitting into this kind of realm? Something happened, and that was evidence for the fact that they don't really love you. They don't really care to the level that they should if they were the mum that they were meant to be, or the dad that they were meant to be. They just are the parent that they are. And the more we can accept that, rather than expecting them to be someone beyond who they're already being, the more there's actually a chance to transform the relationship. And this is what I got this person really present to. I looked with them at all the thoughts they've been having in the recent years about the support they've been given. Not at all the times in the past which were evidence for some belief that their mum didn't really love them. Because I assure you, you will find evidence if you want to. If you want to hold on to a limiting belief such as this, then you will find a trove of evidence. But here we want to ask ourselves, why are we wanting to find more evidence for a belief which doesn't actually serve us? If what we want deep down is to be loved, then why would we continue to hold on to a belief that we're not loved by the person who is meant to have absolutely no conditions on loving us? Well, I think deep down it comes to a fundamental fear or a lack of trust in ourselves and a general feeling of not being enough. But again, here's the beauty of all this. These are just thoughts. These are just thoughts which are shaping and creating your perception of what is real. And yet, just like the thought that I wish I would crawl under a rock and I would just die is no more than a thought, all that other stuff is in that same realm. But here's where the power of not just the thought, but the language that we use becomes so volatile. It becomes volatile because those words have a particular attachment or significance to us based on past patterns of connecting those words with certain feelings and beliefs. And beliefs about love are really deep-seated in the human experience. It's something which people are constantly trying to find love, as if love is something to be found. And that starts because there isn't a foundation where they believe that they are loved. They don't believe that they're loved internally. Because if you realize that you already have that love internally, because love is just a thought, then there's nowhere to go to find love. So when you say, I want someone to love me, what you're saying essentially is, I don't love me. And that's the power of language. It's the power of the language that we use to create the reality that we have. But now let's wrap this up by bringing it back to this shift from the doom and gloom world where you're being told that your mum doesn't love you, to back to the paradigm in which you see how much of a support they have been now. There is, if you wanted to, a space to hold on to all of the things that someone has done to you, all of the things that they could have done better. But I invite you to look. Where were you infallible? Where did you never make a mistake such that you could never forgive others for theirs? And if you think you are infallible, okay, here's the beauty of that. That too is just a thought. And just thinking it doesn't make it true. So what did I do to help this person out of the space of doom and gloom and back into their power? Here's the first thing. I stood for them. I stood for them not as they were being in that moment. I stood for them as how I listened to them in life. I stood for who I know them to be when they are their most powerful, not when they are feeling fragile. Because when you stand for people, when you stand for their greatness, they start to step into it. I don't mean they always do it immediately in that very moment. But when you stand for their greatness, there is a space for them to move towards. I sometimes use the expression that we grow as human beings when we step into the listening of others. We step into the listening of those who have a bigger listening of us than we have for ourselves. And when you surround yourself with people who have a bigger listening of you than you have for yourself, then there is so much space to grow as a human being. It is so tempting to listen to people from the fragile spaces that they can get into. And I'll be honest, it took me a moment. This was a challenging conversation. This wasn't a conversation where I was reacting straight away. I was just listening. I was listening to the entire experience that was being told to me. Holding space, getting their world, thinking through how can I make a difference in this moment? How can I shift this person who I care about so much out of a space where they now think that their life isn't worth living? And that's when I used the tools which I've developed. The tools I've developed as a philosopher, the tools I've developed as a coach. I deconstructed everything which was going on for that person. Everything which was making that experience so heavy, so true, so debilitating, and creating so much despair. And once I had that, there was a space to strip away all of the meaning which was attached to each thought. There was a space to examine each thought for what it was, and to look, really, is this true? And then there was just listening from a place of, I know who you really are. You are amazing. You are a phenomenal human being who I am so proud to have in my life. And you're not doing this alone. I am here for you. And I'm not going anywhere. And slowly, this sunk in. Slowly, the energy changed. They went from being in a space where there was so much overwhelm, there was so much upset, anger, fear, to lightness. The significance, the heaviness was stripped away. They were no longer in a space of thinking, I should just give up. This is ridiculous. Life is too difficult. They were back present to the magical presence that they are. So here's what I want to leave you with. I want to invite you to look in your life. Who can you stand for being bigger than they know themselves to be? And I want you to look. What happens when you listen to people, not from the default context in which you may see them, but from a space of discovery, from a space of, this person has so much love. This person is phenomenal. And they don't get how phenomenal they are. And I am going to make sure that I do my damnedest to let them into that little secret. And please, come and share with me what you discover for yourself. And you can do that by joining the community which I have started. I've joined the community which is called This Humean Life, making the unfamiliar familiar. If you're anything like me, you listen to a podcast like this one, get tons of insights, and then have nowhere to go to really dive deeper and continue the discussion. If that sounds like you, you're going to love this. I have created a free Facebook group just for listeners of this podcast, so we can dive deep and have real conversations on how you can take whatever you love the most from this episode and apply it to your life, alongside me and a group of other seekers and philosophers who are looking for the same kind of dialogue and transformation that you are. To join us, just head over to divedeeperwithsam.com, and I can't wait to meet you there.